Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Impact Factor. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and this week's episode features my conversation with someone who finished her PhD about a year and a half ago, has been doing super cool things since, and I'm excited for you to hear what I found to be a very interesting conversation. So, without further ado, I will introduce Ramya Gurunathan, PhD. So Ramya, since we sort of just met, which I love, which is great. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, about your background? You know, what you studied, how did you end up here talking to me?
Sure. Um, so I grew up actually half in New Jersey, but I don't like to talk about that, and then half half in the Philly area,
Oh,
outside of
cool.
Philly. Yeah. Um, and I'm a material scientist now, and actually I knew I wanted to study material science even in high school, which is I think kind of rare because it's not a
Hmm.
topic that's really discussed in K through 12. But it was actually the product of some pretty good science outreach. So I went to this kind of like open day hosted by Rutgers University,
Oh,
and met a professor there, Dr. Laura Fabrice, who works on like nanomedicine, so targeted drug delivery using nanoparticles.
cool.
Uh, and yeah, I found that like really inspiring. It was a type of technology I hadn't even heard of.
Hmm.
Um, and I think just like a lot clicked in that moment where I was like, I really like physics and chemistry and math. Maybe I can apply this all in one place. Um, so yeah, I did a bachelor's in material science and engineering at Penn State. Then I went and did more school. I got a master's in scientific computing at the University of Cambridge. Yet more
Whoa.
school, did my PhD in material science at Northwestern. And now, today, I actually work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a government
Cool.
lab outside of DC.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so
Yeah.
so much to back up and unpack, which I love.
Yes.
Um, so I love when I have these conversations with people and everyone seems to have that moment or story. Sometimes it's in, high school or something where you see something, some application of science, and you're like, I could see myself pursuing this. Like this is something I've never seen before and I'm intrigued, right? And for
Mhm.
you that was like the nano medicine. Um
Right.
did you end up doing that later, or was that sort of just like the impetus? Is that the right word? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the impetus because I thought I might. In fact, I even spent like a couple weeks in the lab of a professor who did similar work at Penn State. But no, once I got into the classroom and started learning some material science, I personally was really excited about the science side of electronic materials and semiconductors.
Oh.
There's something about it, maybe the quantum and just how like weird and
Yeah.
wonderful it is was really exciting to me. And so that was maybe yet another moment of inspiration, which I feel like really happened actually in lecture. And I really pursued that. So I've been doing
Okay.
semiconductor research in some capacity for most of my training and
Okay.
today. Mhm.
Yeah. And then at Penn State, you did you do research at Penn State and like to pursue that too?
Yeah, I did. I got started in it relatively early, but that wasn't uncommon for our department. And so I think I started in like the beginning of my sophomore year. And it was a lab that was focused on solar cell materials.
Cool.
Mainly, we were growing the materials and measuring their electrical performance, like their resistivity. Essentially, that was a big thing. Um, and yeah, and I actually pursued that. So I stuck with that lab for about 3 years. I was in Well, actually, a requirement of the material science program was that you did an undergraduate thesis. So a
Oh,
lot of us were involved in research in some capacity,
yeah,
and I did my thesis work with that lab.
very
Um,
cool. A lot of chemistry there because you're like growing materials, right? Or
yeah,
was it gases? Were you doing vapor deposition?
yeah, we were doing sputter deposition.
Okay.
So maybe some chemistry, but like
Yeah.
in a kind of high energy reactor. And Yeah, there was a lot of thermodynamics that I learned at that time. Yeah, you might remember that I mentioned I went on to do a master's in scientific computing, which
Yes.
is a
Many
bit of a
questions about
tangent.
that. Yes.
Yeah, so that emerged actually because we were doing all these like thermodynamics calculations by hand, and it was super not reproducible. It was also really not fun. Like me and a PhD student who were working on this, we just kept making mistakes. And so no one in that lab had really done much programming at all. But I had just
Mm.
come off of like an intro to MATLAB course, which I applied to do these thermodynamics calculations. And it was really helpful for me for my thesis project. I also got to see other people apply it to other
Mm.
materials, and that was super inspiring. So that really
Yeah.
got me excited about
Like the
like
tools you could build.
exactly. Yeah, via simulation and computation.
Very cool. So yeah, so let's talk about your master's in scientific computing because I that term gets used a lot and I think it's quite broad. So what was the sort of nuance that you were studying?
Yeah, it was such a fascinating program, and it was a relatively new one, and I did feel like I had to hop across the pond and go to
Mm.
Cambridge to really be able to get this education, because not a lot of people offer this type of program.
Mm.
So they do quick master's programs over there. Mine was 12 months. Some of them are 9 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it was half taught and half research. So the courses that we took really spanned the gamut because I had courses in like AI, machine learning, really mathy courses, just like an upper level differential equation, numerical analysis, and then some courses that were just C++ or really like how do
Mm.
GPUs work? How does a high performance
Oh,
computer work? Like kind of the
yeah.
architecture of it. So yeah, even the people who taught the course spanned departments from material science actually, because we had some courses on like molecular simulation to pure math to like pure computer science. So
Wow. That's
yeah,
cool.
it was neat. And then for my thesis project, it was kind of my first foray into modeling materials in silico. So we were
Mm.
calculating the structure of these nanoparticles that are used in the growth of carbon nanotubes. Um,
Cool.
so I was calculating their structures, then applying some machine learning tools to sort of like categorize the structures. Yeah,
Very
it
cool.
was.
It's cool too because I feel like you had a unique perspective maybe as a previous experimentalist now
Mhm.
doing simulations of materials that you know to be things that people build in labs, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I felt very lucky because I got to do my master's thesis in a group that did both. So they did the
Okay.
carbon nanotube growth themselves, and they also had a bunch of people
That's
who were modeling that process.
so
Yeah.
valuable because I think when you're siloed in one or the other, you just don't see the other side of things. And together it becomes so much more powerful from a discovery and research point of view.
I completely agree. There can be a big rift between the worlds of simulation and
Yeah.
experiment, I've realized. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so it's very cool that you got to touch all those different kind of um very different topics in the world of scientific computing. Were you um were there any that you were like, this is not for me. I don't like this. Just curious.
Yeah, there were kind of. I think I honestly don't like doing some of the heavy quantum computation. Like a big technique used is called density functional theory. And to me, it like really exists as a black box with like many, many, many knobs to tweak. And I don't think
Yeah.
I enjoy that style of modeling as much. And I think I had to learn that there were these different styles.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I really enjoy actually even doing some of the more pen and paper
Oh, cool.
derivations
Yeah.
of physics-based models, which is kind of a lost art, but yeah.
Who knows? Maybe
Right.
it'll come back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everything's a cycle. That's really cool. I'm encouraged by encouraged is the wrong word, but I think it seems like you were sort of interested in this kind of thing and went off and pursued it sort of separately, and then tell me about how you found yourself coming back around to the materials world after that.
Yeah, sure. Um, so I had already applied to PhD programs, and a lot of
Okay.
them were willing to defer for a year so I could go and do this 12-month master's. That was really nice. So yeah, I didn't have to fly back to do like grad school visits while I was in England. That would have been a
Oh,
pain.
thank God. Yeah.
Yeah. So I already knew I was going to come back to Northwestern. I had already selected it,
Cool.
and they selected me. Um, and so, yeah, I think like my heart is always in material science. I definitely wanted to go back to it. And I think something interesting after my experience in Cambridge is I've had this strong conviction that I once again wanted to do simulation modeling type work in a group that does both.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really, and ideally, I would even like to kind of have a mixed experience where I can do some
Yeah.
hands-on work and do some modeling work. And it's interesting because I think in interviews, I talked to some professors, I don't even remember who at this point, who kind of gave the opinion of you can't do both. Like you really need to
Mm.
specialize in one thing in your PhD. And so they discourage kind of getting too much of a mixed background. But I felt pretty strong in that conviction. I think I knew that was important to me, even more so than specific topics that I would get my PhD in. Um, so, yeah, I really like selected the group that I ended up doing my PhD in with that criteria in mind.
Mm.
Yeah, the same group as a previous interviewee on this podcast.
Yes.
Um,
Our mutual connection.
yes, our mutual
Yes.
connection, Matthias. Um, and yeah, I think maybe just as a plus add-on, the topic I did my PhD in was thermoelectric materials. These are once again semiconductors used in energy conversion. So it actually was really close to my sort of material science background as well.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
And you were able to do both the computational and the experimental side?
Yeah, I think in practice, my thesis definitely leaned towards theory.
Okay. Eh,
But I got to keep, yeah, I got to keep my feet wet. And I think, like, as you said, it was important to me to still remain plugged into experiments that were going on. I wanted to hear
yeah.
about them at group meeting and be
Yeah.
close. And I got to, like, yeah, stay involved with it by growing some materials. And I was even, like, put in charge of a couple of the instruments in lab.
I'm sure that helped. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I feel like, I was in an experimental lab and we collaborated with a lot of, theoretical labs, and those collaborations often produced like the most impactful papers
Hmm.
because sometimes it was, this is what we found experimentally, can you, expand on it
Yeah,
theoretically? And then ideally we'd come back to the experimental side and test their prediction, right? And that
right.
makes a pretty powerful conclusion.
Mhm.
But I can only imagine that, someone who's thinking about these, like the theory and sort of the modeling, can only benefit from knowing really what those materials are like and how you work
Yeah.
with them from an experimental side, and even how you simulate something that's real by using, your experience with that real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think something I really liked about our group is the theories we worked on were typically motivated by data. like data
Yeah.
that was a little confusing and
Yeah.
needed to be explained. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I find that so interesting because I feel like that when done correctly, well, let me rephrase. When done well, that collaboration can be so efficient from like a scientific exploration and research standpoint. Like you can, especially material science, because there's so many knobs you can turn in the world of material science. And so it's impossible to imagine experimenting them all, right?
Right.
So the theory side of things I find so interesting. Very
Yeah.
cool.
And I think like a challenge that I grew to really enjoy in our group is that our professor also had a pretty hands-on background. And so he could kind of, I feel like he waned skeptical of
Oh,
like
good.
AI machine learning results or like,
Yes.
or just even
That's
like what was
important.
going on under the hood. Exactly. So it forced me to really understand and be able to explain to him what we were doing.
Why you
Um,
believed what you found.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Um, oh, I just forgot my question. Um, oh, so so obviously there's sort of an underlying computer science aspect to a lot of this work. Did you were you exposed to that type of like classes and stuff in that field in undergrad, or was that something you kind of had to pick up along the way?
Yeah. Not so much in undergrad. I think that intro to MATLAB course, that was our one requirement, and that, that was the
That was it.
experience that I had. Although I did cultivate this kind of experience through some really nice like summer internships that I had
Mm.
done. So one was really simulation based. The other was actually I was the first to program this a robot that
Oh,
yeah was purchased in this lab to automate the synthesis of nanoparticles. So
cool.
that was kind of an interesting in between. Um, so yeah, I had picked up like a little bit of experience via summer internships. I feel really lucky to have had the training I got in Cambridge because I think that's rare. I think a lot of people just self-teach this stuff. There is a lot on the internet. Um, and so being able to even just honestly like dedicate the time to like learn it in a year
Yeah.
was really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, and coming into your PhD program with that experience, I think probably made a difference for you, compared to even students that knew they wanted to do that, but just didn't have, they were coming right from undergrad or whatever, and that's when you start to learn is when you're in grad school, when you already sort of had a little experience with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a big benefit. It's like with every field, there's just so many words, and if you start out knowing some of them, it's easier to pick up the others.
Yes, so
So,
true. So true. Oh, we should make t-shirts that say that. That's a good one. Um, if you know some of the acronyms, the other ones are
yeah.
easier, right?
Yes, exactly.
Um, Very cool. Okay, so let's talk about your uh your current position. So after or
Mhm.
what happened after your PhD, I guess. Let's start there.
Oh, yeah.
Like the job
Um,
search.
right, the job search. So it's interesting. As I mentioned, I'm currently at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So it's a government lab, but maybe not one that a ton of people have heard of. It's a Department of Commerce entity, and they are really set up. Well, I guess at the heart of things, they're a metrology institute, which means they're meant to measure things that haven't been measured. They're meant to give quantitative metrics to things that don't yet have them. Um, and so they do things like how's the atomic clock or the standard
Yeah.
that gets used to set the kilogram, things like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Um,
wow, I can't believe that there's like a whole place that does all those things, but like
yes.
somebody has to do it.
Right. Yeah, it's actually highly important. So I had learned about them, about NIST, way back in undergrad.
Mhm.
And I ended up doing, they actually have a really nice like summer undergraduate research internship program. Um, it's pretty well fleshed out. So I ended up doing that. Actually, not in their facility near DC. I did it in the one in Boulder, Colorado, which was lovely. Um, and really, really loved my experience there. I thought just like the nature of the research was really cool. They have to do a lot of like technique development, working on new characterization tools or new simulation tools. Again, because in a lot of cases they're measuring things that haven't been measured. Um, and so actually, when I was wrapping up my PhD, I felt like honestly, I wanted to keep a lot of doors open.
Yeah.
I wasn't precisely sure where I wanted to land, and I sort of returned back to like a really s strong conviction of like I really enjoyed my experience at NIST, and
Yeah.
I'd love to return there, honestly, and like continue my training there. I think um, a nice thing about NIST too is that it's just a different type of research environment versus academia.
Mm.
And also really like a goal of NIST is to do basic research to guide US industry. So there's chance to like be exposed to sort of industry needs when it comes to research. So it just felt like a really great way to, yeah, kind of keep doors open and expand my horizons. Yeah.
Cool. So is your role then like, are you a research scientist or like, is that, are you part of like a group? I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
yeah.
I am part of a group, but it's funny. I feel like our group does many, many different things, and
Uh,
I think that's can kind of be how NIST is. Some groups are very topically focused. Others are just like, oh, all these people do simulation. We'll put them together, but
yeah.
we're actually
You guys
working on
should
like
talk
very
together, but yeah.
exactly. We're working
Yeah.
on very different problems. Um, so yeah, the name of my group is the Thermodynamics and Kinetics group.
Oh,
Yeah. And yeah, my official title is a materials research engineer there.
okay, cool.
So one of the main projects I'm working on is actually this really big and kind of varied database and also set of tools for performing material simulations. It's called Jarvis.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I've heard of it.
Oh, you've heard of Jarvis? Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So I've been contributing to that. And I actually didn't end up doing very much machine learning AI work during my PhD, but I kind of returned to that and gained a little bit more of like an expertise in neural networks and deep learning methods for material science.
Very cool.
Mhm.
Very cool. Um, so you wanted to keep the doors open. How long have you been at NIST now?
About like a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but still liking it? Still feel like the doors are open?
Yeah. So NIST, I think, has served as like a really great stepping stone.
Mhm.
Again, because I have like greater exposure to industry needs. I think I was really lucky to like plug into this kind of big, cool project there via Jarvis. So
Yeah.
that's been an opportunity to just hone many different skills. Like I said, with deep learning, that's been I feel like kind of a hot topic that I've gotten to really dive into in the last year. But yeah, you've caught me at an interesting time because
Mm.
I did recently accept a position in industry. So I have not yet
Oh,
started, but I will be moving on. So I'll be working at a semiconductor company.
cool.
They're called Wolfspeed, and they work on transistors that operate at pretty high power, pretty high temperature. So one big use case, one of the areas in which these devices are really critical is actually in electric vehicle motors.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of like a big blooming market.
It is. Yes, I hear that.
Yeah.
What about was there any point in your path that you thought about continuing academia, or was that sort of never really on the table?
Yeah, I think No, no, it was on the table. I think I was really excited about national lab, especially
Yeah.
actually versus academia. I think I really like the idea of like being a public servant
Hmm. And getting to
um,
do research as part of that, right?
and getting to do research as part of that. So I really did enjoy my time at NIST, and I'm really glad that I did get that bit of experience. Academia was at times a consideration. Yeah. And I'm not like discarding it, which
Yeah.
I know it's unusual to like re-enter academia. Um, but I think it's interesting because I have a very academic background. And in
Hmm.
a way, I really do want to see the industry needs when it comes to semiconductor research.
Yeah.
Because I think personally, like, I really value having an impact in that way and being able to do something that could be transferable into technologies that are developed. Um, and so, yeah, when I thought about, okay, maybe would I write a like put in an application for a professorship and write up my research pitch. Um, I just think like for me personally, it would be so much strengthened if I could back it up and say like, hey, this is important and I know it's important because of
I've
these
been there.
reasons, you know?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's such a good point. And like like you said, I think it's kind of rare to go back, but I've seen it, and I think when people do go back, it's usually for some of those reasons. It's like I discovered this. This is how things are happening in industry, and I think that there's some basic research to do around this topic, and or I also like would like to study something that my company doesn't want me to. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
freedom too is part of the decision to go back.
Yeah. I mean, I think we like know is true about academia is you have to deal with a certain amount of rejection, like grants
Mhm.
rejected and these things rejected. So I think it's really important to be like very self-motivated about your ideas. And I think just like I when I've explained this transition to people, I use this phrase in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way, but I'm kind of serious about it. I want to be like the triple threat with like academic experience, government experience, and industry experience, and
I
then just
love
sort of
that.
see where things go.
That's great. I mean, gone are the days where we start working somewhere and we never leave, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
go see what works for you and what doesn't work. And I love that. Um, that's great. What was I gonna say? Oh, it's funny that you mentioned that you think about like what your research pitch would be.
Mm.
Because one, I've never actually thought about that question because I've never really considered
Hmm.
that process. But now that you say that, I'm gonna go think about that for like a second. Like I've been out of my PhD now for 5 years,
Yeah.
and I wonder if there's something I could think about from like what I've seen in industry.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. I don't
I
know.
bet it's evolved so much from when you graduated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what a fun thought experiment. Maybe I'll have to do like an episode where people come on and like pitch their
Ooh,
ideas. That could be fun.
that would be really cool.
Like a little Shark Tank vibe. We'll call it something else though. Um, okay, cool. Let me just check my questions.
Mhm.
Um, what, if anything, do you miss about your time as a PhD student?
Oh, um, yeah. So in some ways, I viewed kind of my time here at NIST. It kind of feels like this in-between phase, this little like liminal stage between academia and not academia. So I haven't moved so far from like a PhD-like research experience. But I do think um, the motivation of what I do has changed a bit. Like I said, I'm much more focused on kind of developing tools for researchers. I think what I miss is kind of like the deep diving into scientifically motivated questions. That
Yeah.
was really fun, especially with my research group, whom I adored. Like they were
Yeah.
so great and so fun and so humble. And I think we had great times just kind of in front of the marker board
Oh
that
yeah.
existed in our lab office, just talking about things that were important or unimportant, like
Yeah. Sometimes
just any
just
scientific
for the hell
question.
of it, right? You're just
Yeah,
like, let's deep dive into this for no particular reason.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those moments were really fun.
Very cool.
Treasure that.
Um, and then just this is like a tangential question, but what now that you're like a working person who's not a PhD student, do you have like hobbies and what other things do you do with your life?
Oh my gosh, that's been huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do have some hobbies. One is actually, this is interesting. So I started vocal lessons since moving
Oh,
out here and graduating from my PhD. It's in a classical Indian form of music called
cool.
Carnatic music. Yeah, and I just find this choice of mine interesting because as a kid, I was sort of like forced to learn this art form, and I really disliked it, and I protested it. But now, I don't know, yeah, just with like a little bit of free time and more income to work with, it was something I really wanted to do. I just wanted to return to this thing I had
That's
studied in
awesome.
my childhood, and it's been really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that in person? Those yeah.
Sadly, no. It's virtual, but yeah, I don't know if you have experience with like the DMV area. It's kind of vast, and there's like a bunch of different townships.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my vocal teacher does live in the DMV area, but she's still
Okay.
like an hour and a half away. Sometimes I
Oh
go and
God.
visit
Yeah.
her, so yeah.
And with COVID and everything, it's easier almost to do it
Yeah, to do it
remotely.
virtually.
Very cool. Anything else?
Um, yeah, that's kind of been a big one. I do think I've gotten better at like exercising
Yes.
since starting to work. You just have more regular hours. I think that's really it.
Routines. Yeah.
Yeah, you have more of a routine, and so it's easier to like fit things like that in. And cooking for myself, I've gotten a lot better at that
Oh.
too. So maybe just these like basic self-care things have really
Basic like being a
improved.
human things. Yeah.
Yeah, those are my hobby right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, that's important. I still haven't learned how to cook, so here we are.
Yeah, it's
Um,
fun.
very cool. Nice. So let's see. I think that I'll anything else I missed, or otherwise I'm gonna move on to my wrap up questions.
Oh yeah.
Anything, anything you want to plug? Any
Ooh.
solo albums coming out? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no
Not
solo
yet.
albums, no cool new podcast to advertise.
One
Um,
day.
yeah, one day. I
One
really like
day.
if you ever want to flip this and have someone interview you about why you
Yeah?
started this, like I would be I have so many questions. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I not everyone would be like open to doing that. So that could be super cool.
Yeah.
Um, all right, I might take you up on that. That would be
Mhm.
fun.
Mhm.
All right, so let me dive into my wrap up question. So I know it
Sounds
was a
good.
while ago, but what what do you feel was something that was challenging that you faced, um, or that you dealt with, early on? Maybe the transition to PhD, although you were coming from your master's. So, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. I actually found the transition to PhD somehow still pretty difficult. I
okay.
think at the beginning, like you're stretched pretty thin as a first year PhD student, taking classes, starting your research, dealing with a lot of learning curves. And I think my first project was a big challenge for me, actually. My my advisor will admit this. It was like a pet project he had for a while that he couldn't get anyone
Ah,
to work on. Um,
those
and
are tough.
right, yeah. And I think it had started with this like discrepancy that he saw in the literature, and he just wanted someone to like dig into this model and sort of unearth this discrepancy and then write like a review paper, some sort of
Yeah.
paper about it. Um, so I think like for me it was challenging. It also felt very solitary. And so I struggled with that aspect. I think it was also hard to motivate because I was just getting oriented into this field. So I was sort of like, who's going to use this like old
Yeah.
model and like who's going to care about this discrepancy? I think things often happen backwards in a PhD program. And it really wasn't until I graduated that I was like, oh, I can now really understand why people find this useful, you know? Um,
Interesting. Very
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So, yeah, that was
Yeah, it's so true though that like, well, one, I think the first project you're on can sort of dictate how that transition goes.
right.
Sometimes you're sort of put on this pet project. I know plenty of people who are put on the pet project, and
Hmm.
it's sort of isolating and you sort of feel like it's just different enough than what other people are doing that you're like alone.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also very valuable, especially if you can get through it, I think, because
Yes.
it's uh it just produces you as a independent worker and
Yeah.
someone who can kind of get through something like that.
Yeah, so I should say it was probably the biggest challenge, but also the project I'm most proud of for sure.
Yeah.
And to help with that, it's also like the papers that came out of that project were my most highly cited. So, my professor had
Impact.
reason, yeah,
Yeah,
to believe it
yeah,
would be useful to the field. It just took me a little longer to like understand that for myself because
yeah.
it takes a while to like understand the needs of a field and what is well
Yes.
understood, what is not understood. It's its own
Yes.
learning curve, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
And you're getting sort of dropped into it, and
Yeah.
also, by the way, you have to take classes, and
Yes.
learn how to live on your own and all this stuff. So it's like it's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a lot, but
So true.
cool.
Mhm.
Um so maybe related to that or not, but what advice would you give to yourself if you could talk to yourself from year 1?
Yeah. So I think it is very related to that. I don't think I was particularly good at asking questions or just like
Mm,
asking for help. Maybe that's it, asking for help. Um, I think like I'm always worried about like burdening people and things like that. And I think especially with this sort of like first year pet project, I had to be organized even about asking for help. Like it took some mental energy to figure out like, okay, what do I need to ask, you know?
yeah.
um, yeah, I think sort of getting over that hump and just forcing people in my group, forcing my advisor to just talk through things with me. And they were more than willing, it just
Sure.
took asking for this, is really like what saved me in this
Okay.
project. My advisor was one of those people who is hands off but accessible. So
Oh,
he's not someone who would do like a structure, normally would do like a structured weekly meeting with a student. Um, but I just asked for that because I just really needed to talk about this project and he was more than willing. And I think that that is really what helped me out and helped me feel more motivated too. I think it's just really nice to sort of talk through things. I think some of the upper PhD students also helped me just see like the value in what we were doing and help me kind of better understand, okay, how would we write this up into a paper? What
mm,
is important? What needs to be emphasized here?
what's
Those
missing?
are exactly, those are difficult things to figure out in your first year. And I think just asking for help and yeah, talking to people about what I was doing
Yeah.
was really the key. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to highlight what you said about, asking your advisor for that weekly meeting because
Mhm.
I I am sure that so many people are in that position and they're like, well, they're like, I guess that's not a thing we're gonna do, because like
Yeah,
you'd think that your advisor would be the one to initiate that, but this
right.
is your journey too, and so encouraging younger you, or if we're playing time travel game here,
Yeah,
to speak up and say this is what I need from you is a weekly check-in,
yeah,
is fully within your right as a PhD student.
yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I do feel sympathetic to like maybe, oh, not wanting to step on toes, but really like, yeah, professors decided to be professors so that they could interact with students.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
And my experience too is that they love talking about their ideas, so
Hmm.
you're essentially working on an idea that they had, and so sometimes those conversations can be super fun for both parties. So
That's so true. Yeah,
yeah,
very true.
very cool. Good advice. Good advice. Okay, my last question, which is one of my favorite questions, is do you have a good memory or a story you'd like to share from your program? Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, open-ended.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like this is an easy choice to answer this question. But I did get to go to South Korea for a conference
Oh,
during my PhD program, and that was like a really, really incredible experience, I think, to be over there. The conference itself also was exciting because it was in our subfield of thermoelectric materials. And I think it's it's a field where my professor just kind of knows everybody.
yeah,
So we
love that.
went, yeah, it's so fun. We went and we just like, got to meet all these really cool scientists from around the world. And I really just like that experience was really rich to me. After the conference, I did some travel with my lab mates, and they were like actually phenomenal travel buddies. I don't even think I expected that. So yeah, we had a really good time.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
That's great. I mean, I always encourage students to go to conferences because I think it's such a different side of the academic life, to go and connect with people across the world who are also interested in the same things that you are. Like, so cool.
Yeah, yeah, it makes you feel like you're really just part of something, which you are, but you really like feel that at a
You feel it.
conference.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's so fun. I love hearing everyone's fun memories because even though it feels like it was a tough 5 to 6 years, for some reason we have the good memories locked away, and that it helps to look back on them.
Oh yeah, yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you work hard, but there's like a lot of rewards that are sprinkled throughout. So,
Yeah, agreed. Very cool. Um, all right. Well, that's all I have.
mhm.
Um, good luck in the new position. Maybe we'll
Thank you so
circle
much.
back at some point and see how you're doing and, you know,
That would be great.
catch up,
Yeah.
let our listeners catch up on your new position and um but yeah, so thanks for coming on the show
Thank you so much.
and
This was super fun.
good.
I really
I'm
like
glad.
talking about, yeah, grad school.
Everything. Yeah, right,
Everything.
me
Every
too.
grad school and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, I will talk to you soon. Thanks to Ramya for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.